My name is Effie Barnes. I'm 78 years old, widowed for 12, and still living in the same cedar-shingled house Robert and I bought when Reed, our only son, was a toddler. The house creaks now, just like my bones, but it's mine. It holds my memories. Our wedding picture on the mantel, the quilt I stitched the winter after Reed was born, the little star ornament Robert carved out of oak with his calloused carpenter hands. Every corner carries a ghost of laughter, of warmth, of a life once overflowing. This year, Christmas was supposed to be my gift to them. I wanted to make it perfect. One last chance to prove that I still mattered, that I was more than just an old woman who signed checks and smiled politely. I paid for everything. The catering, the champagne, the designer decorations, even the personalized gift bags Georgia insisted on. Over $10,000 gone in one sweep of generosity. I told myself it was worth it. Worth being included. Worth hearing my son laugh again like he used to when he was 10, wearing tinsel like a crown and calling himself the Christmas King. When I arrived at Reed and George's grand glowing house, strings of professional lights draped in perfect lines, wreaths bigger than my front door, I carried not just wrapped presents but hope. A fragile, flickering hope that this time, finally, I would be part of their circle. But Georgia met me at the door with that breezy smile of hers, the kind that never touched her eyes. She adjusted a sequined runner on the table and said, almost like she was tossing away a napkin, "Effie, it's only my family this year." Simpler for head count. The words dropped like glass shattering on tile. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Couldn't even move. I looked at Reed, my Reed, waiting for him to stand up for me. But he only shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered, "Mom, you know how it is. We'll do a brunch after the holidays." His eyes slid away from mine, just like they did when he was a boy hiding a broken ornament under the couch. I felt my face stiffen into something that might have looked like a smile, but inside I was burning. I had paid for every rose on that table, every champagne flute lined up in rows, every glittering bulb. And yet I wasn't even welcome at the table. My name wasn't on a single place card. I left my small bag of gifts on the sideboard, tissue paper peeking out like a white flag of surrender, and excused myself quietly. No one tried to stop me. Outside, the snow fell in heavy silence, each flake sticking to my coat as though the world itself wanted to bury me. When I sat in the car, staring at that house that glittered like a magazine cover, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal seep into my bones. My son had let me disappear. My daughter-in-law had erased me completely. I drove home through the storm, my hands tight on the wheel, whispering to myself, "You are not invisible. Not yet." What they didn't know, what Georgia would learn too late, was that the perfect Christmas she was building sat on a foundation of my money. And tomorrow morning, with one signature, I could take it all away. Back in my quiet house, I didn't even take off my coat. I walked straight to the old oak cabinet Robert built the summer we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Its drawer stuck the way it always had, squealing in protest, but I tugged it open and pulled out the folder marked Reed's Family Fund. Inside were neat rows of papers, joint account agreements, bank statements, receipts. All the evidence of years of sacrifice. All the proof that when Robert passed, I had chosen trust over caution. I had signed Reed's name under mine, making him secondary holder, thinking it would safeguard his future. I never imagined it would become the weapon that made me invisible in his home. I spread the papers across the table, the lamplight turning the numbers into wounds. Catering, $6,200. Decor rental, $2,300. Personalized gift bags and trinkets, $1,500. The total, just over $10,000. My life savings, drained to buy George's illusion of perfection. On the corner of the table, I set down Robert's ornament, the oak star he carved in his workshop when Reed was 10. The velvet ribbon had frayed after decades, but when I held it, I swore I could still hear Robert's laugh, deep and steady. "Keep the family close, Effie." He used to say that every Christmas, as though the words themselves could build walls strong enough to hold us together. My hands trembled as I whispered back, "I tried, Robert. I tried." A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, my neighbor Mia stood there, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, a tray of almond cookies balanced in her mittened hands. Behind her, her husband Dominic wrestled with a string of tangled lights, grinning through the mess. "I thought you might want something warm," Mia said softly, stepping into the kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. She set down the cookies, inhaled the faint scent of pine from my tree, and glanced at the papers scattered across my table. Her eyes paused, not prying but understanding. "Looks like heavy work," she murmured. "Just family finances," I said quickly, ashamed. She sipped the tea I poured her, then told me a story about a colleague who hogged every budget, every resource, until Mia quietly redirected the funds. Not out of spite but out of balance. "Sometimes," she said gently, "taking back what's yours isn't revenge. It's justice." The word settled deep in me, heavier than the papers, stronger than the ornament. Justice. When Mia left, I sat alone with her words echoing in the room. I slid my hand across the joint account folder, then to Robert's ornament. One piece of the past, one piece of the present. Together, they pointed to a decision I had been too afraid to face until now. Tomorrow morning I would walk into the bank, and George's perfect Christmas would collapse before it even began. Back in my quiet house, I didn't even take off my coat. I walked straight to the old oak cabinet Robert built the summer we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Its drawer stuck the way it always had, squealing in protest, but I tugged it open and pulled out the folder marked Reed's Family Fund. Inside were neat rows of papers, joint account agreements, bank statements, receipts. All the evidence of years of sacrifice. All the proof that when Robert passed, I had chosen trust over caution. I had signed Reed's name under mine, making him secondary holder, thinking it would safeguard his future. I never imagined it would become the weapon that made me invisible in his home. I spread the papers across the table, the lamplight turning the numbers into wounds. Catering $6,200. Decor rental $2,300. Personalized gift bags and trinkets $1,500. The total, just over $10,000. My life savings, drained to buy George's illusion of perfection. On the corner of the table, I set down Robert's ornament, the oak star he carved in his workshop when Reed was 10. The velvet ribbon had frayed after decades, but when I held it, I swore I could still hear Robert's laugh, deep and steady. "Keep the family close, Effie." He used to say that every Christmas, as though the words themselves could build walls strong enough to hold us together. My hands trembled as I whispered back, "I tried, Robert. I tried." A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, my neighbor Mia stood there, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, a tray of almond cookies balanced in her mittened hands. Behind her, her husband Dominic wrestled with a string of tangled lights, grinning through the mess. "I thought you might want something warm," Mia said softly, stepping into the kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. She set down the cookies, inhaled the faint scent of pine from my tree, and glanced at the papers scattered across my table. Her eyes paused, not prying but understanding. "Looks like heavy work," she murmured. "Just family finances," I said quickly, ashamed. She sipped the tea I poured her, then told me a story about a colleague who hogged every budget, every resource, until Mia quietly redirected the funds. Not out of spite but out of balance. "Sometimes," she said gently, "taking back what's yours isn't revenge. It's justice." The word settled deep in me, heavier than the papers, stronger than the ornament. Justice. When Mia left, I sat alone with her words echoing in the room. I slid my hand across the joint account folder, then to Robert's ornament. One piece of the past, one piece of the present. Together, they pointed to a decision I had been too afraid to face until now. Tomorrow morning I would walk into the bank. And George's perfect Christmas would collapse before it even began. The next morning, the cold cut straight through my coat as I walked across the snowy sidewalk toward the bank. My leather tote, worn smooth by decades of groceries and papers, hung heavy on my shoulder. Inside was the folder, every page folded neat, every number burned into my mind. The bank's glass doors slid open with a hiss, releasing the dry warmth of paper, polish, and faint carpet cleaner. I felt small under the fluorescent lights, like a child walking into a schoolroom, about to be scolded. Reagan Mathis, the manager, looked up from her desk. A calm woman with tidy hair and glasses that slid slightly down her nose. She greeted me as if she already knew why I had come. Her desk was an island of order. Pens aligned, screen angled just so. She motioned me to sit. As she opened the file, my hands tightened around Robert's ornament tucked inside my pocket. The wood was smooth from years of touch. The ribbon soft against my palm. Gave me courage. Reagan's voice was steady, professional. "Mrs. Barnes, you are the primary holder of this account. You may withdraw the funds or close it outright. No one can contest it. Legally, it's yours." I nodded, my throat dry. I had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud was like having a locked door swung wide. "Any pending payments?" I asked. "They'll bounce," she said. "Vendors won't be paid unless you reauthorize." There was the key in my hand. I could end George's pageant before it began. But as I gripped the pen she slid toward me, my mind drifted backward. To read at 10 years old, standing on a stool in this very kitchen, draping tinsel around his neck and crowning himself Christmas King. His laughter had been so loud, so alive, that I laughed until my sides ached. He was pure joy then, no shadows, no shame. I remembered the year he brought home his first report card with a C in math. He had hidden it under his pillow, cheeks wet with tears, whispering, "Don't tell Dad." I didn't. Instead, I sat beside him night after night, working through long division until he lifted his head proudly and declared, "I get it now, Mom." He had been mine then, my boy, my Reed. Where had that boy gone? What had Georgia taken from him that he could stand in a room filled with my money, my memories, and pretend I didn't exist? My pen hovered over the paper, shaking. I heard Reagan's voice, calm but firm. "Mrs. Barnes, may I offer one word of advice? Make sure this protects you, not punishes them. That distinction will matter." I swallowed hard. The thought of punishing Georgia thrilled me more than it should have. But this wasn't just about her. This was about me reclaiming something I had let slip away for too long. My dignity. My signature scraped across the page. Quiet, final, like the closing of a heavy door. I folded the forms into my tote, the ornament pressed close beside them. As I stepped back into the brittle winter air, the snow glittered hard and bright, as though the world itself had changed. What Reed and Georgia didn't know was that their perfect Christmas had already begun to unravel. And by Christmas Eve, the house that had erased me would echo with silence. By the end of the week, the cracks in George's pageant dream were no longer cracks. They were gaping holes. The ballroom reservation had been cancelled, the decorator had moved on to another client, and even the caterer, who had tolerated George's tantrums for years, finally said, "We're done here." That night, the storm came. Georgia burst into the kitchen like a gale wind, hair wild, cheeks blotched with fury. "This is your doing," she spat, her eyes locked on me. "You've been meddling. Don't think I don't know." Reed followed behind, his face pale, his hand reaching toward her shoulder like a leash that had long since snapped. I set my spoon down gently beside the bowl of stew I'd been ladling. The air was thick with spices, the warmth of the stove, and the laughter that had just moments before floated from Mia and Dominic's room. Now silence pressed in. "Georgia," I said calmly, "you built your Christmas on borrowed glitter. It was never going to last." Her hand slammed onto the counter, rattling the bowls. "How dare you? After everything I've done for this family." Reed's voice cut in, softer, almost pleading. "Georgie, please. Don't you please me, Reed," she snapped. Then she whirled on him, her words like knives. "You promised me the biggest Christmas this town had ever seen. You said your mother's money would make it happen. And now," she pointed at me with shaking fingers, "she's ruined it. She's ruined us." Reed's eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, terrified of disappointing me, desperate to be loved. But the weight of George's fury pulled him back under. He lowered his gaze, ashamed, and said nothing. It was then I understood. He would never choose me. He couldn't. The man who once crowned himself Christmas King had long since handed his crown to her. I felt no anger, only a strange, steady peace. Because while George's voice rose higher and higher, while Reed shrank smaller and smaller, I could hear something else upstairs. Mia's laughter, soft and certain, carrying through the rafters. That was my Christmas now. Not chandeliers or pageants or grand feasts, but stew shared around a worn kitchen table, ornaments smoothed by memory, and a potluck planned with love. I wiped my hands on a towel and stood. "You'll have to excuse me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "I have a Christmas to prepare." Georgia stared at me as though I had spoken another language. Reed said nothing at all. And just like that, I left them in the kitchen, surrounded not by glitter or grandeur, but by silence. The night of Christmas Eve arrived brittle and sharp, the kind of cold that bit through gloves and stung your cheeks. The town sparkled with lights, but inside our house 2 very different Christmases unfolded under the same roof. Downstairs, Georgia paced like a queen without her court. Her sequined gown shimmered under the chandelier, but the phones in her hand stayed stubbornly silent. The ballroom was closed, the vendors gone, the guests confused or unwilling to come without the promise of spectacle. All that remained was a woman dressed for a throne that no longer existed. Reed hovered near her, his tie loose, his shoulders sagging. He kept whispering, "Maybe we can still salvage something," though the desperation in his tone betrayed him. Georgia snapped back each time, her voice sharp enough to break glass. Upstairs, the air was different. The scent of roasted chicken drifted from the oven, filling the halls with warmth. Mia and Dominic had spread a red checkered tablecloth across the kitchen table. A pot of stew bubbled gently, rolls waited in a basket, and on the counter sat a pie Mia had baked, edges uneven but golden. The little group gathered, Mia, Dominic, a few of their friends from town who had nowhere else to go, and me. Laughter rippled through the room as bowls were passed and hands brushed in small, unpolished gestures of kindness. Someone started humming a carol, off-key but sweet, and soon voices joined in. I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not as Reed's mother, not as George's shadow, but simply as Effie. Part of a circle stitched together by love, not money. Then, through the thin walls, George's voice sliced up the stairs. "Reed, do something. Don't just stand there." Her fury was the sound of a Christmas collapsing, loud and brittle. But in our small kitchen, the stew simmered, the pie cooled, and the music swelled. I slipped the ornament from my pocket, Robert's old carving, its wood worn smooth by time. I placed it gently on the table beside the pie. Everyone quieted for a moment, their eyes drawn to the little piece of history. "This," I said softly, "is the heart of Christmas. Not chandeliers, Not grand stages. Just this. People who care enough to sit together. Mia reached across the table and touched my hand. Then we'll make this our tradition. And as laughter rose again, mingling with the clink of spoons and the warmth of shared food, I knew the truth. George's Christmas had died, but ours had just begun. The house was hushed when I woke. The snow outside lay thick and untouched, muffling the world in silence. For a moment, I simply sat on the edge of my bed, ornament warm in my hand, listening. Downstairs I heard the first sound, a crash, then George's voice, ragged with rage. I followed it slowly, each step steady, until I reached the bottom. The living room was chaos. Torn ribbons littered the floor. A toppled vase spilled water across the rug. Georgia stood in her nightgown, hair wild, her eyes blazing with the desperation of someone who had lost everything. "This is your fault," she screamed at Reed, her voice trembling. "All of it. We were supposed to have the Christmas of the century. And now look at us. Empty, humiliated." Reed stood frozen, shoulders hunched, his face drawn. He looked older than his years, worn down by her fury and by the wreckage of promises he could never keep. When Georgia saw me, her voice rose higher. "Ooh, you poisoned him against me. You ruined what we built." But I didn't flinch. The ornament rested firm in my palm, grounding me. "You built nothing, Georgia. You borrowed shine and called it gold." And Reed. My eyes turned to him, softer, aching. "He let you." Reed's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was the truest thing he had ever given me. Mia and Dominic appeared in the doorway, still in their slippers, drawn by the noise. Their presence, quiet and steady, was a shield behind me. I wasn't alone anymore. George's face twisted, and for a heartbeat I thought she might strike me. But instead, she let out a hollow laugh, sharp as glass. "Enjoy your little soup kitchen Christmas, Effie. We'll see how long it lasts." She swept past Reed, slamming the door so hard the ornaments on the tree trembled. The silence that followed was heavy, final. Reed sank onto the couch, his hands covering his face. For a moment, I almost stepped toward him, almost gathered him up as I had when he was small and frightened. But I stopped. That boy was gone, and the man before me had made his choice long ago. Instead, I turned toward Mia and Dominic. "The stew's still warm," I said. Mia smiled softly, looping her arm through mine. Dominic nodded, steady as ever. And together we walked back into the kitchen, where the table waited. Simple, imperfect, but ours. As I set the ornament in the center, the morning light caught on its worn edges, casting a faint glow across the cloth. It was not the glitter of chandeliers or pageant crowns. It was gentler, truer. For the first time in years I felt at peace. Christmas had come, not in grandeur, but in grace. The day after Christmas dawned gray, the snow softened by a gentle thaw. Icicles dripped like tiny clocks ticking down, each drop marking the start of something new. I sat by the kitchen window, cradling a mug of tea. The house was unusually quiet. No shouting, no demands, no glittering plans rattling against the walls. Just silence. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace, not absence. Mia padded into the kitchen, still in her robe, her hair a loose tumble. She set down a plate of leftover rolls and smiled. "Breakfast," she said simply, sliding into the chair across from me. Dominic joined us moments later, his steady presence filling the room with ease. We ate together, not in haste, not in grandeur, just together. And as we broke bread, I realized that this little ritual was what Christmas had always meant, the quiet gift of being seen and belonging. Later, Reed appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He looked at me with something raw in his expression, though he didn't speak. For a long moment, it was as if he wanted to say he was sorry, as if he wanted to confess. But the words never came. Instead, he nodded stiffly, turned, and walked back down the hall. The sound of his footsteps faded into the stillness. I didn't chase him. Not this time. That afternoon, Mia pulled out a deck of cards and insisted we play. Dominic groaned good-naturedly at losing hand after hand, and I laughed so hard my ribs ached. When Mia crowned herself Queen of Christmas Poker, with a paper napkin folded into a crown, I thought of Reed's tinsel crown all those years ago. The memory didn't sting anymore. It just lived alongside this new joy, softer, gentler. As evening fell, I took the ornament from my pocket and hung it on the small tree in the corner of the kitchen. It wasn't tall, its lights blinked unevenly, and the garland sagged in places, but when the glow touched that worn piece of wood, the whole tree seemed to shimmer. For the first time since Robert passed, I felt him there. Not in the grand halls or the chandeliers, but in this imperfect little room, where love was enough. I whispered into the quiet, more to myself than anyone else. "Merry Christmas, Robert. We're all right now." And I meant it. And it was enough. The holiday lights lingered long into January, but their glow felt different. The town slowly tucked away its garlands and wreaths, leaving bare windows and pale skies. Life moved forward as it always does, but under this roof, the changes were permanent. Georgia didn't return after Christmas morning. Word drifted back through whispers in town. She'd taken refuge with a cousin in the city, where she could parade her grievances before anyone who would listen. She spun the story as betrayal, a kingdom stolen from her hands. But no one cared for long. By New Year's, her glitter had dulled. Reed stayed. He moved like a shadow, up before dawn, gone until late, working odd jobs, avoiding our eyes. When he did appear in the kitchen, his voice was thin, brittle. He tried to start sentences, but they dissolved before they found their way out. It was as if the weight of silence was all he had left. I pitied him, but I no longer bent myself around his silence. I no longer filled the void with forgiveness he hadn't asked for. I let him sit with what he had lost. Mia and Dominic, meanwhile, carried on with quiet joy. They organized small dinners with friends, brought in laughter that filled the halls without echoing hollow. One evening, they dragged me out into the snow for a walk, lanterns in hand, our breath puffing white as we made our way down the frosted streets. Children passed us on sleds, their shrieks of delight cutting through the cold, and for the first time in decades I felt the thrill of winter again. Inside, the kitchen table became our gathering place. Letters and bills stacked neatly at one end, a vase with fresh pine boughs at the other. We ate together, played cards, planned little things like who would bring bread and who would carry home apples from the market. It wasn't much, but it was ours. One night, as I tucked the ornament back into its box, Mia came up behind me. "You've been lighter lately," she said, her voice gentle. I looked at her, this girl who had become more like a daughter than a daughter-in-law. "Because I've stopped carrying what was never mine to hold," I replied. She smiled and kissed my cheek, and I thought to myself that perhaps this was what Robert would have wanted for me. Not grand gestures, not battles fought in silence, but peace, warm and steady, like the January hearth. And though Reed still haunted the hallways, and George's absence hung like a shadow, I no longer lived beneath either of them. It was late January when Reed finally came to me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, mending a tear in my old wool scarf, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked older than his years, his shoulders stooped, his eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. For a long moment he said nothing. The clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the wind whistled against the eaves. Then, in a voice raw and uneven, he spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words landed heavy, too heavy to lift easily. They were years late, worn thin by neglect. But still they were there. I set the needle down and looked at him. For the first time, I saw not the boy with tinsel on his head, not the man cowering under George's demands, but simply my son, flawed, lost, standing at the edge of himself. "I know," I said softly, "but sorry won't change the past." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I don't know how to fix this." I wanted to tell him that not everything can be fixed. That some things are meant to be laid down, left behind, allowed to die so something truer can live. Instead, I reached across the table and placed the ornament in his hand. The old carving, worn smooth by decades of touch, sat between us. "This was your father's," I said. "He made it for me the year you were born." It reminded him that Christmas was about beginnings, not endings. Reed stared at it, his fingers trembling. For a moment I thought he might break. But then he closed his hand around it, nodded once, and left the room. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That night, after the house had settled into quiet, I sat alone with a cup of tea. The ornament rested back in its place on the tree, glowing softly in the dim light. I thought of Robert, of the boy Reed had been, of George's brittle empire, and of Mia and Dominic's laughter filling the kitchen. And I realized the truth that had taken me so many years to learn. Christmas was never about the grandeur or the glitter. It was about belonging. About love that could survive silence, survive loss, survive time itself. I whispered into the stillness, "I'm home now." And for the first time in years I truly was. I was free.